Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, where we discuss how news from Taiwan is impacting the world. I'm Betty Chen. Taiwan is now setting up a climate change agency with a goal of achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which will be in line with the UN's Paris Agreement. However, the plans to cut down carbon emissions still seem very vague, which have led to mixed public reviews. So to discuss this, we have invited Mr. Martin Su, who is based in Taipei. He is a sustainability expert and CSO of eChain International. He's also the organizer of Green Drinks Taipei, a monthly gathering for people to talk about sustainability. So Martin, welcome to the show. Please say hi to our audience.
Hello, my name is Martin.
Hi, Martin. Welcome. So, I would like to ask you about what the world expects from Taiwan's climate change response. And here's a little bit background to set the scene. So, Taiwan has opened a new climate change agency to mark Earth Day. The government body will oversee the country's response to the climate crisis and enact a new climate law passed earlier this year. The law commits Taiwan to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The office is also responsible for collecting a carbon fee from polluting industries, although the rate is still not yet decided. So Martin, let's start from the top. You've been observing Taiwan's climate scene over the decade. So what do you think about Taiwan's goal in trying to achieve net zero by 2050? Is it possible?
Well, I don't think it's a question of possibility or not. It's it's a necessity, right? So it's more of the direction of the global community's goal. Even though Taiwan is not part of the United Nations that formed the Paris Agreement, but as a global community with the global market as well as the global well-beings of humans and other species, we're part of it. So I think it's more about how the government and the people and the industry needs to be worked together to support the goal toward net zero by 2050, if not earlier.
So one of Taiwan's four major transition strategies toward net zero is industrial transition. So talking about industrial transition, how does that impact maybe your company or your industry or your peers?
One of the biggest, I guess, key items for this whole climate change topic is carbon, right? So that's something more and more countries and regions starts to focuses on international trade level. And especially for Taiwan, and especially for our industry, most of our revenue and business comes from abroad. So if that's the case, then we need to start to look into the topic of carbon. How can we reduce our impact? And that would directly influence on the decision that we make, the type of infrastructure that we use, whether it's about energy source, whether it's about raw material options, whether it's about production procedures, all of that, even logistics, needs to be adjusted to generate the right amount of resources in the lowest amount of carbon as possible to fit into that international needs to reduce carbon emissions.
Definitely, we all understand that fighting against climate change is such an important topic. But for some small and medium-sized enterprises, maybe in order to meet the global standards, they will have to increase their costs, or they think these standards are way too difficult for them to achieve due to their size. So for these kind of companies, do you have any suggestions for them?
I think people need to understand it's not just for SME, it's also for big, large corporations, right? Like, it's definitely an extra, you can say, cost at this point. But that's more of the reason that it was not a cost in the past. We've been emitting carbon for a long time, but nowadays, as we realize, it's really more of an issue that we humans that we are generating, that we are needed to include that into our operational cost. So it's more about how do we look at it in a different lens that it needs to be put on, but how can we change the way we operate to reduce that burden, so to speak, or impact on the business that you operate, to come up with more creative ways to think outside of the box, rethink your business model, rethink the way you produce, rethink the material you use, rethink the way you generate energy, how you get energy. So there's a lot of adjustment and mindset shift that's needed for everybody.
So traditionally, it's one of the traditional industries, but I understand that in your role, you have been trying very hard to promote sustainability. So how do you do that? Do you have any good practices that you can share with our audience?
Sure. So for us, we focuses on production itself, to manufacture fabrics. And for us, it's basically two sources of change that we want to make, if not three, actually. So the first one is more looking into the material that we use, raw material source that we get, and where are they coming from, and what can we do with them. It's something that we wanted to look more into to create more of a circular material source, whether it's a biological cycle or technical cycle, making sure this material can be going on and on towards its or usage life. The second part looks into the production itself. How can we make our production as close to zero waste as possible and as close to zero emission as possible? That means that we need to change the way we operate and use this raw material source or resources, whether it's water, chemicals, or energy. So that's the second part. And the third part I kind of mentioned and thought of is more about to rethink the business model. How can we work with our partners to create a different kind of business model that supports a work way of life that reduces the emission compared to the old mass production, mass produced, mass sales mindset.
Right, so thank you, Martin, so much for sharing with us maybe the secrets or your experience. So we just talked about that Taiwan is going to establish the new climate change agency. So how do you think that this agency can fit into the big scheme?
Well, I think any agency that has the power to regulate or set out rules to steer the society in a certain way is always impactful. And now that we have one focusing on climate change is great, right? Like they supposedly they have the power and the position to provide certain guidelines for the industry to set out rules or the industry to behave a certain way or even towards general public to incentivize certain behavior that reduce carbon and punish or you can say have some kind of penalties for the actions that produce more carbon.
So it seems like it's like a carrot and stick approach, right? Not just incentivize,
Yes.
but for those who violate, maybe they will be sanctioned in the future, right?
Yes.
Good. So thank you
That would be
very
the
much.
idea.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much, Martin. So with this in mind, and now we're going to zoom out a bit more. We will talk about how Taiwan's strategies are compared to the world and what does the future hold. So now we're going to dive in a little bit more. We have reporter from TaiwanPlus News, Sally Jensen, who is going to share with us the story about Taiwan's pathway to net zero by 2050.
Ministers, experts, and academics have been preparing this strategy for months. It's a $29 billion plan that they hope will turn Taiwan into a global leader in the fight against climate change. The 2050 net zero pathway, as it's known, was unveiled. It's an initiative outlining the steps Taiwan will take to reduce its carbon emissions.
甚至于这些国际大厂的这个供应链的要求也会越来越具体，所以变成台湾来讲的话，在国际间扮演这个供应链很重要的角色，你大概没有办法去避免这样的要求，所以怎么样做好准备，或者是马上来启动，时程上来讲就变成非常非常的重要。
Energy took center stage among the 12 main carbon-cutting strategies outlined in the initiative. It draws heavily from similar plans which have been adopted in the US and South Korea. Taiwan accounts for around 1% of global carbon dioxide emissions and has one of the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions in Asia. It's also facing the effects of climate change, such as rising sea levels and more extreme weather, which may be why it's so eager to boost its efforts in cutting emissions.
So that was Sally Jensen from TaiwanPlus News. For the full report, please feel free to visit TaiwanPlus website. So now back to you, Martin. So could you please tell us, based on your experience, we know that Taiwan's net zero policy is modeled after the United States. So based on your past experience, what can we learn from the advanced countries like Europe and the US?
Well, I think in general, looking at the strategy and structure of the current law and policies, focusing on Taiwan compared to the West, mostly Europe and the US, we can see that it's a lot of focuses on energy sector about how we generate our power through different means. But I think another focus that the policy needs to be maybe look into is also how, aside from the energy source, the current way of things of operating within different industries, how do we produce things from A to B, Is there a way to make it more efficient in a way that we use less energy? Also more about how potentially the source of the material that is generated or being purchased can be from different either location, different type. Also the output of the product, going back to the business model idea that how can we change the way the product's being used or maybe reused or later on being maintained, also later maybe even be recycled. So there's a lot of things within that whole structure to head toward the net zero needs to be considered aside from the raw material and also the energy source. That's maybe the focus of Taiwan right now.
Yeah, that's very well said. And now Taiwan is trying extremely hard to promote the circular economy. And also, Taiwan just announced that starting from next year, we will be collecting a carbon fee from 287 of its largest emitters. So what does this mean for the Taiwanese companies and consumers?
Well, I mean, it's definitely an added cost, so to speak, right? But it's an added cost that's necessary to incentivize the industries or company that emits large amount of carbon needs to rethink about their actions and potentially change the way of operating to a lower emitting model. So I think overall that's more of a start to try to mimic the system that's already exists in many parts of the world, having some kind of trading system of carbon or some kind of carbon tax to support the low carbon actions and technologies that's already been happening around the globe.
Right, exactly. Also, Taiwan's market is export oriented, so we have a lot of suppliers. They will be heavily reliant on exports. So in order to be better integrated with the global market, what else can Taiwan do?
I think that Taiwan has a lot of energy in terms of mindset and also tech to support the world towards net zero. Like we are part of a global supply chain, value chain to generate products, items, parts for tons of industry, ranging from automobile to electronics to textile to many kinds of machinery as well. So it's more about how can we lead that change within the global topic in regard to climate change, to change the way we produce, to change the material that we use, change the energy source that we have to support and shift the world to a low carbon future. That we can definitely have a key role and impact to make if we choose to do so and commit to it.
Very well said. So I still have one more question. Martin, I understand that you're the organizer of Green Drinks in Taipei. We're like-minded people who advocate for climate change with the efforts to fight against climate change would gather together and have some talk. So how does your network feel about Taiwan's future towards net zero, reaching net zero by 2050?
Well, I mean, for people who have been paying attention about sustainability and actions, it's always happy to see that your living space country is working toward that goal. But it's more about how it is implemented and if it's fast enough, right? Like we always talk about 2050, but in reality, it should probably be a lot faster. And Taiwan definitely has the resources and talent to make it so. So I think for people like us who are keen for change and towards a more of a sustainable living style, definitely happy to see the commitment, but it's more about who's doing it, how do we do it, can we do it much more, faster and more impactful? That's way to be seen. But we're definitely looking forward to that to come, but also, evaluating the results and actions as they come.
Thank you so much, Martin. That's all the time we have. Thank you for your time, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much. This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. If you have any questions for us, you can find TaiwanPlus on Facebook and Twitter. See you soon.